There is something happening right now that you may not have words for yet. A quiet knowing that has been building in you, pressing against the inside of your chest, like something that wants to be let out. You feel it when you wake up before your alarm, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering why everything around you feels like it is on the edge of something enormous. You feel it when you are in a room full of people, and yet you cannot shake the sensation that you do not quite belong to that room, that your life is pointed somewhere else, somewhere larger, somewhere you have not arrived at yet. That feeling is not confusion. That feeling is confirmation. You are not here by accident. You did not find this message because you were scrolling and happened to stop. Something in you was already listening before the first word was spoken. And that is the thing about chosen ones. They are always drawn toward what they need before they know they need it. Their spirit arrives first. Their understanding catches up later. And right now, your spirit is already nodding because it recognizes what your mind is still trying to process. God did not bring you to this moment to embarrass you. He did not walk you through every closed door, every unanswered prayer, every night when you could not explain the weight on your chest, just to leave you here with nothing. No. He walked you through all of that because he was building something in you that cannot be built in comfort. He was doing something in you that silence and pressure and waiting and ache are the only tools strong enough to accomplish. And now, right now, in this exact moment, heaven is confirming what your soul has quietly suspected for longer than you can remember. You were chosen before you understood what that meant, before you knew how to carry it, before you had the language for the loneliness that comes with it. You were set apart not because you are perfect, not because you have everything figured out, but because something in you refuses to let go of the call, even when every circumstance around you has told you to release it and move on. That refusal is not stubbornness. That is divine persistence. That is the mark of someone heaven is not finished with. And if you have been wondering whether you imagined it, whether you were wrong about the dreams and the signs, and the quiet voice that keeps showing up in your lowest moments, the answer is no. You did not imagine it. You were not wrong. The chosen ones always doubt themselves somewhere in the middle of the journey, because the middle of any divine assignment looks nothing like what was promised at the beginning. The middle is messy. The middle is quiet in ways that feel like abandonment. The middle is where most people turn around, but you are still here, and that matters more than you know. There are signs that are specific to you, signs that you have not been able to explain to others because the moment you try, it sounds too private to fit inside ordinary language. Your dreams have become more vivid, more layered, like there is information being placed in them that your waking mind is not yet ready to fully receive. You wake from some of them with a sense of weight and direction that does not match anything happening in your outer life, and yet it feels more real than your reality. That is not random. That is your inner life being enlarged to hold what is coming. There is a frustration in you that does not belong to your circumstances. You could change your job, your city, your relationships, and it would follow you, because it is not a frustration about your situation. It is the frustration of someone who was made for more than what is currently visible. Someone whose capacity has outgrown the container they have been living in. That holy restlessness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something enormous is right about you. You have noticed that certain people and places that used to feel like home have begun to feel distant in a way you cannot fully explain. There is no betrayal, no dramatic falling out, just a quiet growing apart, like a tide pulling back before something arrives on the shore. That distance is not loss. That distance is preparation. The relationships built for your assignment are not the same as the relationships built for your comfort. And heaven has been slowly, carefully separating what belongs to your past from what belongs to your future. And there is this, the same message finding you from different directions. A song lyric that stopped you mid-breath. A scripture that showed up in someone else's conversation and landed directly on the question you had been sitting with for weeks. A stranger who said something that had nothing to do with your situation, and yet touched the exact nerve of what you have been praying about. When the same message arrives through multiple mouths and through multiple moments, it is not coincidence. It is confirmation. Heaven is deliberate, and heaven has been very deliberate about reaching you. You were not built to blend. You were not designed to disappear into the crowd and make everyone comfortable and shrink yourself to the dimensions of what others can receive. You were built for something that will require the full height of who you are. And that full height has been developing in seasons when it felt like nothing was developing at all. The season of waiting has not paused, it has ended. There is a specific kind of ache that belongs to the chosen ones, and it is not the ache of someone who has given up. It is the ache of someone who has kept going without knowing exactly where going leads. It sits differently than ordinary sadness. It does not flatten you the way grief does. It is more like a pressure, a constant low hum behind everything you do. The feeling that you are carrying something heavier than what is visible to the people around you, and no one has quite handed you the language to name it out loud. But today, right now, someone is naming it for you. And the moment you hear it named, something in your chest is going to release, because being seen, truly seen, is one of the most powerful forms of relief a human being can experience. So let me name what you have been carrying. There is a grief that arrives without warning, and it is not grief for a person or a loss you can point to. It washes over you sometimes in the most ordinary moments. You are doing something completely routine, washing dishes, sitting in traffic, standing in a grocery store, and suddenly there is a wave of something enormous that moves through you. A sadness that feels older than your current circumstances. A mourning for a version of your life that was supposed to be here by now. For the person you thought you would have become. For the milestones you watched others reach while you stood in the same place. Praying the same prayers, waiting for the same doors to open. You have probably tried to shake it off. You have told yourself to be grateful, to focus on what is good, to stop looking backward. And gratitude is real and necessary. But so is this grief. And it deserves to be acknowledged before it can be released. There are people and places in your life that used to feel like belonging, and now they feel heavy. Not because something terrible happened. Not because anyone wronged you in a way you can clearly name. They just feel like wearing a coat that no longer fits. You go through the motions, you show up, you say the right things. But there is a part of you that sits slightly outside the room, watching, aware that something has shifted. You wonder if something is wrong with you. You wonder if you have become distant or cold or ungrateful. You have not. What has actually happened is that you have been growing in a direction that those environments were not built to accommodate, and the discomfort you feel in spaces that once felt like home is not rejection. It is evidence of expansion. You are not losing your place. You are outgrowing a container that was always meant to be temporary. Then there are the dreams. Not every dream. Not the random imagery that dissolves the moment you open your eyes. These are specific. They come back. Sometimes the setting changes, but the feeling is the same. You are standing in front of a door, or you are searching for a room you cannot find, or you are almost at something, almost through something, and then you wake before you arrive. These dreams are not frustrating you without reason. They are showing you something that your waking mind resists. You are on the threshold of something. You have been on it for a while. And the reason the dream keeps returning is because the door in the dream is real, and something in you knows it, and something in you is being prepared to walk through it when the moment arrives. And then there is this. You keep encountering the same message. You will be in a conversation with someone who has no idea what you have been praying about, and they will say something that lands directly inside the exact room of your private struggle. You will open a book to a random page, and the paragraph will feel like it was written for a meeting between you and this page that was scheduled long before you arrived at it. A song will play, and for a moment you cannot breathe because the lyrics are answering a question you did not ask out loud. You will watch something, read something, hear something, and it will feel less like information and more like a response. This is not coincidence. This is not the human mind looking for patterns. This is the chosen one recognizing that they are being communicated with, that heaven has taken the time to reach them through every channel available, because the message is that important and you are that significant. Now, let me speak to the specific pain underneath all of these signs, because the signs would be easier to carry if they were not wrapped in so much discomfort. The sleepless nights are real. The lying awake, running the same thoughts, the same questions, the same fears in loops. Not because you lack faith, but because the weight of what you are carrying is legitimate and enormous, and it does not turn off when the lights go off. You have prayed yourself to sleep more than once. You have begged for peace and then laid in the dark wondering why the peace was slow to arrive. That is real. That counts. And the fact that you are still here, still praying, still asking, still holding on with hands that are tired, that is one of the bravest things a person can do. The loneliness is real. Not the loneliness of someone without people, because you may have plenty of people around you. The loneliness of being in a room full of people and knowing that no one in that room has access to the specific interior of your experience. The loneliness of a path that by its nature must be walked in sections that no one else can walk for you. The loneliness of a calling that cannot be fully explained and therefore cannot be fully shared. You were not designed to be alone. But you were designed for a level of intimacy with your purpose that sometimes looks like aloneness from the outside. That distinction matters. The feeling that you have made mistakes you cannot recover from is real. The voice that says you waited too long, moved too slowly, ruined your own opportunity. That voice is persistent, and it knows exactly which memories to surface and which wounds to press. But here is what that voice never tells you. It never tells you that the same God who ordains the destination also accounts for the journey it takes to get there. It never tells you that detours and divine hands become part of the route, not interruptions to it. It never mentions that the thing you call a mistake was in many cases exactly the experience your assignment required you to have in order to carry it with the compassion and the credibility it will one day demand. The feeling of being misunderstood is real. You have tried to explain what you sense in your spirit to people who love you and watched their faces struggle to hold it. Not because they do not care, but because not everyone is equipped to receive what you carry. The chosen ones often spend years searching for someone who can see what they see, who can hold the weight of the vision without flinching. And the longing for that kind of witness is not weakness. It is the hunger of someone who was. designed for deep resonance, for the kind of companionship that operates at the level of purpose rather than just personality. Now I want to redefine something for you, because the way you have been interpreting your waiting may be the very thing making it harder to survive. You have been reading your season as punishment, as if the delay is evidence of divine displeasure, as if the silence means heaven has moved on and left you holding prayers that will never be answered. You have looked at the distance between where you are and where you believed you would be by now, and you have drawn the conclusion that something went wrong, that you are behind, that you have been overlooked. And I need to say this to you as directly as I can. You have not been overlooked, you have been positioned. There is a difference between being overlooked and being positioned that is not visible from where you are standing, but it is enormous. Being overlooked means the opportunity passed you and no one noticed you were there. Being positioned means you were placed exactly where you are, with full awareness and full intention, because the vantage point you occupy right now is the only one from which certain things can be seen and certain work can be done. The chosen ones are rarely in the spotlight during their preparation season. They are in the back room. They are in the field. They are in the quiet, unglamorous, invisible work of becoming, and it does not look like favor from the outside. But it is favor. It is a specific and targeted and costly kind of favor that cannot be faked and cannot be shortcut. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. And preparation at this level is not comfortable because you are not being prepared for something small. You are being prepared for the full weight of what heaven has assigned to your hands. And that weight requires a version of you that did not exist 2 years ago. That version is being built right now, in the waiting, in the ache, in the faithfulness of someone who keeps showing up, even when showing up feels like it is accomplishing nothing. Type the words "I see it" in the comments right now if this message is speaking directly to something you have been carrying alone, something you have felt for a long time, but no one has ever put into words for you. And if you are listening to this anywhere in the world, please take a moment to like this message and share it with someone you know who is also in their waiting season. Because sometimes the most powerful thing one chosen one can do for another is simply say, "You are not alone in what you are feeling." And I found something that named it for me. Before anyone gives you a tool, they should first acknowledge what it has cost you to still be standing here, still be searching, still be reaching for something that your hands have not yet fully closed around. So let me say this first. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still open, after everything you have walked through, that is not nothing. That is everything. Most people who carry what you carry find a way to put it down and walk away from it. They stop praying. They stop believing. They stop showing up for a life that has not yet shown up for them in the ways they expected. But you are still here. And that means you are ready for what comes next. There is a practice I want to give you today. Not a theory, not a concept. Something you can do with your hands and your breath and your minutes, something that costs nothing and requires no special equipment and no particular skill level. Something that works whether you are sitting in a quiet room or parked in a car, outside a building you are not ready to walk into yet. I am going to call it the 3-step return, because that is exactly what it is. It is a way of returning to yourself, to your God, to the version of you that exists beneath all the noise and pressure and unmet expectation that has been layering on top of you for longer than you should have had to carry it alone. The first step is what I call the grateful interruption. I want you to think right now, not about what you are grateful for in the usual sense, Not the list of blessings you rehearse when you feel guilty for feeling bad, but something more specific and more honest than that. I want you to think about something that did not happen. A door that did not open when you were desperate for it to open. A relationship that did not work out when you were certain it was your answer. An opportunity that fell through at the last moment and left you standing in the wreckage of a plan you had built your hope on. Think about one of those things right now. Hold it in your mind. And then, from whatever place of honesty you can access in this moment, consider the possibility that the closing of that door protected you from something you cannot fully see from where you are standing. Consider that the relationship that did not work out would have taken you somewhere your assignment cannot go. Consider that the opportunity that collapsed was not your opportunity at all, but a very convincing imitation of it that would have led you away from the real thing rather than toward it. This is not toxic positivity. This is not the shallow instruction to just think happy thoughts about painful things. This is something much more grounded and much more costly than that. It is the practice of holding open the possibility that the God who sees the end from the beginning was operating with information you did not have access to when that door closed. It is the practice of making room, even a small amount of room, for the interpretation that your story is not broken, it is simply not finished. The grateful interruption is not a feeling you manufacture. It is a posture you choose, even in the absence of feeling, even when every emotion in your body is telling you a different story. You choose to hold open the possibility. That is the first step, and it is enough. The second step is what I call the declaration of now. This is where the concept of time becomes important, and I will speak more deeply into this concept in the pages that follow, but for now I want you to understand this. There are two kinds of time operating in your life simultaneously. There is clock time, the kind that moves in minutes and days and years, the kind that tells you how old you are and how long you have been waiting and how far behind you are from where you thought you would be by now. And then there is a different kind of time altogether, the kind that does not move on a clock, the kind that is not measured in duration, but in readiness, in alignment, in divine orchestration. The ancient word for this kind of time is kairos, and it operates by completely different rules than the time on your phone screen. The declaration of now is simply this. You speak out loud, in whatever private space you can find, a single sentence that places you in kairos time rather than clock time. Something as simple as this. I am not behind. I am exactly where the purpose of my life requires me to be right now. You do not have to feel it when you say it. In fact, it is often more powerful when you say it precisely because you do not feel it, because that gap between what you are declaring and what you are feeling is the space where faith does its most essential work. Say it in your car. Say it in your bathroom with the door closed. Say it quietly under your breath in a meeting where no one can hear you. Say it once. Say it with as much intention as you can gather in that moment, and then let it go. You are not trying to convince yourself of anything. You are simply making a declaration that aligns your voice with what heaven has already confirmed about your timeline. That is the second step. The third step is the one that leads somewhere. And I want to be honest with you about why it is the third step and not the first. It is the third step because steps 1 and 2 are doing important interior work that prepares the ground for step 3 to be more than just a nice idea. Step 3 is 7 minutes of silence, not meditation in any complicated or religious sense of the word, not a technique that requires training or a particular posture or years of practice. Simply this. You sit or lie down or stand still if that is what works for you, and for 7 minutes you do not speak. You do not scroll. You do not fill the space with input of any kind. You breathe. You let the silence be silence. You let your mind move through whatever it moves through without chasing any of it. And you hold, loosely, the intention that this space is an offering, that you are making 7 minutes of quiet available to whatever God wants to do with 7 minutes of quiet in a person who has been asking big questions. 7 minutes sounds small, and I understand if part of you is thinking that 7 minutes of silence cannot possibly be the thing that shifts anything significant in a life that has been waiting for years. But I want to offer you a different frame for those 7 minutes. The issue is not the duration. The issue is the frequency, not the frequency of how often you do it, though consistency matters, but the actual electrical frequency of what happens inside a human brain during sustained, intentional quiet. There is research that has been building for decades around what happens to the brain during this kind of quiet. And what the researchers have found is not small. It is not subtle. It is the kind of finding that, once you understand it, makes the 7 minutes feel less like a spiritual suggestion and more like a biological necessity. And I will walk you into that research in just a moment, because I think it will change the way you understand not just these 7 minutes, but the entire landscape of your mental and spiritual life. But first, I want to say something about why this third step is difficult for the chosen ones specifically. It is difficult because the chosen ones are often the people who have trained themselves to be perpetually productive, perpetually available, perpetually useful, because in seasons of waiting, the activity feels like faithfulness. If I am doing something, the thinking goes, then I am not wasting the time. If I am reading, researching, planning, preparing, then I am being a good steward of the season. And all of that is true to a degree. But there is a dimension of preparation that cannot happen while you are in motion. There is a frequency that cannot be activated while your mind is full of input. There is a kind of receiving that requires you to stop transmitting for a moment, to close your mouth and your phone and your planning and your explaining, and simply be available in the silence for what can only be delivered in silence. You have been transmitting for a long time. Transmitting prayers, transmitting effort, transmitting plans, transmitting worries, transmitting hopes. And all of that transmitting is legitimate and necessary. But at some point, the chosen one has to shift into receiving mode, and receiving mode is quiet. Receiving mode is still. Receiving mode is 7 minutes where you are not asking or explaining or figuring out. You are simply open. You are available. You are, in the most literal sense of the word, present. There is something I want you to notice about these 3 steps together. They form a sequence that moves from release to declaration to receptivity. You begin by releasing your grip on a closed door, choosing to hold open the possibility that it was protection rather than punishment. Then you make a declaration that anchors you in a time that operates outside of the pressure and judgment of the clock. And then you go quiet, creating the interior space that is necessary for what comes next to be received rather than manufactured. This sequence can take as little as 15 minutes from start to finish. It can be done before you get out of bed in the morning. It can be done on a lunch break. It can be done after everyone in your house has gone to sleep and the quiet of the night is the only quiet available to you. It does not require a special location. It does not require a particular emotional state. You do not have to feel ready for it to work. You just have to do it. And the doing is enough to begin what only consistent practice can complete. I want to be honest with you about what these 3 steps are not. They are not a formula that produces guaranteed outcomes on a predictable timeline. They are not a technique that replaces the ongoing, messy, faithful work of believing in a God you cannot see through a season you cannot explain. They are not magic. What they are is a daily practice of alignment. They are the physical and spiritual equivalent of turning your face in the right direction every morning. They cannot force the sun to rise, but they ensure that when it does, you are facing it. And the sun is rising. I need you to hear that. I do not say that as a motivational decoration. I say it because what comes next in this message is going to require you to believe it, or at minimum, to be willing to believe it, which is a different and more honest thing than certainty. The willingness to believe is enough. It is the seed from which everything else grows. Hold the willingness. Practice the 3 steps. And then come with me into what the science is now confirming about the kind of brain that receives what the chosen ones are being called to carry. You just did something in those 7 minutes of silence that you may not have had language for until right now. You were not simply off resting. You were not simply being still. You were, in the most precise neurological sense of the word, tuning. And what you were tuning toward is something that researchers have spent decades trying to understand, measure, and replicate, not because it is mystical in a way that cannot be examined, but because it is real in a way that demands examination. What happens in the brain of someone who enters genuine stillness, genuine receptivity, genuine quiet intention is not a small thing. It is one of the most significant neurological events available to the human mind. And it turns out that the chosen ones, the people who have been set apart, pressed down, refined in silence and shaped in seasons of waiting, carry a brain that is primed for exactly this kind of activation. Here is what the science has begun to confirm in language that I think will feel less like information and more like recognition for you. Every human brain operates across a spectrum of electrical frequencies. These frequencies are called brain waves, and they are not metaphor. They are measurable, observable, electrical patterns that shift depending on what you are doing, what you are experiencing, and what state your nervous system is in. When you are anxious, running through your list of worries at 2 in the morning, your brain is operating in a high-frequency state called beta. When you are deeply asleep, it drops into the slow, restorative frequencies of delta. But there are 2 frequencies in particular that researchers have identified as being associated with something that sounds less like science and more like what the chosen ones have been experiencing their whole lives. The first is theta. Theta waves operate between 4 and 8 cycles per second, and they are associated with creativity, deep intuition, accelerated learning, and the kind of insight that arrives not through effort but through a particular quality of stillness. Children live in theta almost continuously, which is why they learn at a rate that adults cannot match, and why their imaginations operate without the boundaries that adult minds construct over time. Theta is also the frequency that is most active during the moments just before sleep and just after waking, those liminal spaces where ideas arrive fully formed and where the sense of divine communication feels closest to the surface. Most adults spend almost no deliberate time in theta. The demands of daily life keep the brain locked in beta, reactive, analytical, processing threat. But the chosen ones, and this is the part I need you to hear carefully, the chosen ones who have been through extended seasons of waiting and pressing and interior development often find that their access to theta is unusually available. The silence that felt like punishment was actually training your brain to drop into the frequency where your greatest capacities live. The second frequency is gamma. Gamma waves operate at the highest end of the measurable brainwave spectrum, above 30 cycles per second, and they are associated with what researchers call peak cognitive performance. Moments of sudden clarity, the experience of understanding something at a level that feels like it arrived from outside yourself. The integration of information across different areas of the brain happening simultaneously in a way that produces insight rather than just analysis. Researchers studying the brains of experienced meditators, of people in what psychologists call flow states, and of individuals during moments of profound spiritual experience have consistently found elevated gamma activity. These are the eureka moments, the moments when something shifts and you can see clearly what was obscured before. The chosen ones have described these moments to me in language that is almost identical across thousands of different people in thousands of different circumstances. A sudden knowing, a clarity that arrives without warning, a sense of pieces clicking into place that were scattered for years. That is gamma, and it is not reserved for an elite category of human being. It is available to any brain that has been prepared to access it. This is where the work of Dr. James Rivers becomes relevant to everything you are experiencing right now. Dr. Rivers is a neuroscientist whose training and early research was connected to MIT, and whose work has included collaboration with research programs linked to NASA. He has spent more than 30 years studying the intersection of brainwave states and human performance, and what he found over the course of those decades of research was both simple and staggering. The brain can be guided into specific frequency states through the precise application of sound. Not any sound, not background music or white noise, a specific category of audio that works directly with the brain's natural tendency to synchronize with external rhythmic input. This phenomenon is called brainwave entrainment, and it is one of the most well-documented and consistently replicated findings in the field of neuroacoustics. The mechanism works like this. When your ears receive two slightly different audio frequencies simultaneously, one in each ear, your brain does not simply process two sounds. It generates a third frequency internally, a frequency that corresponds to the mathematical difference between the two input tones. This internally generated frequency then begins to influence your dominant brainwave pattern, gently guiding your brain toward the target state. This is called a binaural beat, and in combination with precisely calibrated isochronic tones, it creates an audio environment that can reliably shift a brain out of the high-stress beta state and into the deeper, more receptive frequencies of theta and gamma. The brain does not have to try to get there. It simply follows. The way a tuning fork that is struck will cause a nearby tuning fork of the same frequency to begin vibrating without being touched. Resonance is a law, not a suggestion. What Dr. Rivers created after more than 30 years of this research is called the genius wave. And I want to introduce it to you here in this moment, right after the 3 steps, and right in the middle of this conversation about brainwave frequencies, because the connection is not accidental. The 7 minutes of silence in step 3 of the practice I gave you is the same 7 minutes that the genius wave is designed to fill. Because Dr. Rivers found, through extensive research involving thousands of participants across multiple study periods, that 7 minutes is the optimal duration for brainwave entrainment, long enough the brain to shift into the target frequency, short enough that the shift does not produce fatigue or overstimulation. 7 minutes, done consistently, produces measurable changes in the brain's baseline frequency patterns over time, which means that the chosen one who practices this daily is not just having a nice experience each morning. They are literally rewiring the resting state of their own brain toward the frequency of clarity, creativity, and divine receptivity. I want to share something with you that arrived in my inbox after an earlier version of this message went out. A woman I will call Sarah had been carrying what she described as a fog for almost 2 years. She was a person of deep faith, disciplined in her practice, committed to her purpose, and yet she could not access the clarity she needed to take the next step in what she believed she was called to do. She had tried everything within the framework of her existing habits, and nothing had shifted the fog. She began using the Genius Wave 7 minutes each morning, consistently, for 3 weeks. She wrote to me after the 3rd week and said something I want to read to you as accurately as I can. She said that on a Tuesday morning, sitting in the same chair where she had sat confused for 2 years, something cleared. Not dramatically, not with any external sign. Just a quiet, profound clearing, like a window being wiped clean from the inside. And in that clarity, she could see the next step. Not the whole path, just the next step. But the next step was enough to move. Another man I will call Daniel had struggled for years with the specific anxiety that comes from being a chosen one who cannot yet see the full picture of what they are called to. The sleepless nights I described earlier were his reality in a very literal way. He had not slept a full night in over a year. He began using the Genius Wave, not because he believed it would work, but because he had run out of other options. And the 90-day money-back guarantee meant he had nothing to lose by trying. He wrote to me 6 weeks later. He had been sleeping. Not perfectly, not every night, but with a consistency and a depth that he had forgotten was available to him. And as the sleep returned, so did something else, a sense of being held. A sense that the silence of the night was no longer hostile, but generative. That is what shifts when the brain finds its frequency. I know that some of you listening right now are thinking that $39 is not a small amount of money when you are in a season where every dollar is spoken for before it arrives. I hear that. That is a real and legitimate concern, and I am not going to minimize it by pretending otherwise. What I will say is this. The Genius Wave normally sells for $49. Through the link in the pinned comment below, it is available today for $39. And every purchase is backed by a 90-day complete money-back guarantee, which means that if you use it consistently for 3 months and you experience no shift whatsoever, you get your money returned in full. No argument, no complicated process. Dr. Rivers built the guarantee that way because the research gave him the confidence to stand behind this completely. The risk is not yours to carry. It has already been covered. I also want to say this clearly, because it matters. There are imitation products that have appeared using similar language and similar framing. The only source through which you can be certain you are receiving the authentic program developed by Dr. Rivers and backed by that 90-day guarantee is the link in the pinned comment below this video, not a search result, not a third-party site. The pinned comment, that is the only link I can personally confirm. And the current pricing, $39 rather than $49, is available for a limited time and to a limited number of people. This is not a pressure tactic. It is simply the reality of how the program is being offered in this specific window. And I would rather you know that information and make a decision with full awareness than discover later that the window had closed. The chosen ones were not designed to operate at half capacity in seasons that require their full frequency. The waiting has sharpened you. The silence has prepared you. And now, there is a tool that meets that preparation with precision. 7 minutes a day. The same 7 minutes you already practiced in Step 3. The only difference is that those 7 minutes now have a frequency behind them that your brain was designed to receive. there is something I need to do before we go any further, and it requires a different kind of honesty than what most messages like this one are willing to offer. Because it would be easy, right now, to move straight from the tool and the science and the hope into the next encouraging idea, to keep the momentum of inspiration moving forward without pausing to sit in what has actually been true for you. But that kind of rushing past the pain is not the same as healing it, and you deserve more than a message that decorates your wound without cleaning it first. So before we talk about what is coming, we need to talk about what the waiting has already taken. Not to stay there, but to honor it. Because what was taken from you was real, and the God who sees everything sees that too. The years of waiting did not just pass. They took things with them as they went. Specific, irreplaceable things. Things that cannot be returned simply by the arrival of what you have been waiting for. Because some things only exist in the window of time in which they were meant to happen. And once that window closes, it does not reopen in the same form. I am not saying this to produce despair. I am saying it because looking at this clearly, without the softening filter of premature encouragement, is the only way to genuinely grieve what was lost so that you can genuinely receive what is coming. You cannot carry the full weight of a new season while you are still secretly mourning the contents of the last one without permission to do so. So let me name what the waiting has taken. It has taken relationships that could have been built. There were people who crossed your path in seasons when you were too consumed by your own interior storm to be fully present to them. There were friendships that had the potential for depth and duration, but the weight you were carrying made true intimacy difficult, and slowly, those connections thinned out and eventually disappeared, without a dramatic ending. Just a gradual fading that you noticed one day when you realized you had not spoken to that person in months. There were romantic possibilities that required a version of you that was not yet available, a version that was still being formed in the furnace of the waiting, and those possibilities passed before that version was ready to show up for them. There are people who would have been in your life by now, people whose presence would have made the journey easier and richer and less lonely, and they are not here. That is a real loss. It counts, and it is allowed to hurt. The waiting has taken ground in your career or your calling that feels genuinely difficult to recover. You watched people who started at the same place you started move forward into opportunities and recognition and stability, while you stood in what felt like the same spot, turning the same prayers over in your hands, asking the same questions. You told yourself that comparison is the thief of joy, and you tried to mean it. But underneath the discipline of not comparing, there was a quiet and honest awareness that time in a career, time in a creative field, time in any domain of human endeavor does not simply pause and wait for you to be ready. It moves, and the ground that was available 5 years ago is not exactly the same ground that is available today. That is not catastrophic, but it is real, and pretending it is not real does not make you more faithful. It just makes you less honest. The waiting has taken your freedom to dream out loud. There was a time, earlier in your journey, when you could speak the large and specific things you believed you were called to without immediately censoring yourself. You could say out loud what you saw for your life, without the defensive awareness of how many times the timeline had already shifted. But the accumulating weight of unmet promises, the gap between what you declared and what materialized, slowly taught you to hold your vision more privately, more carefully, to stop sharing the full picture with people because the full picture had been met with too many well-meaning questions that felt like quiet doubt. And so you became more guarded, more protective of the interior things, and something was lost in that guarding, a kind of holy recklessness, a willingness to say the large thing in front of witnesses that is genuinely hard to recover once it has been trained out of you by disappointment. And the waiting has taken, perhaps most painfully, your easiest access to trust in yourself, not your faith in God, because faith in God is precisely what has kept you here, but your faith in your own perception, your trust in the things you sense and see and know in your spirit. Because when you have been certain before, and the certainty has not materialized in the form you expected, you begin to hold your own knowing more lightly. You begin to second-guess the clarity that arrives. You begin to wonder whether you are genuinely hearing something or whether you are simply very skilled at believing what you want to believe. That erosion of self-trust is one of the most insidious costs of extended waiting, because the chosen ones depend on their ability to trust their own spiritual perception. Their assignment requires it. And the waiting, without intervention, can quietly hollow out the very instrument that the assignment demands. I am not moving past these things quickly. I want you to sit with what I just named for a moment. Let it be true. Let the losses be losses without immediately reaching for the silver lining. The silver lining is real, but it is only powerful when you have been honest about the cost first. The silver lining on top of unacknowledged grief produces a kind of spiritual bypassing that feels like faith, but is actually avoidance. Real faith goes through the grief, not around it. Now I want to bring someone alongside you in this moment. Someone whose story you may know in outline, but whose middle chapter, specifically the middle chapter, deserves more attention than it typically receives. I want to talk about Joseph, not the part of Joseph's story that gets preached most often, not the moment he reveals himself to his brothers, not the elevation, not the reconciliation, not the image of a man who once wore a coat of many colors, now dressed in the garments of Egyptian authority. I want to talk about the pit, and then the house of Potiphar, and then the prison. Joseph carried a dream from the time he was 17 years old, a specific dream, vivid and detailed, the kind of dream that a chosen one receives and cannot shake because it feels less like imagination and more like transmission. He told the dream, which was perhaps his first costly mistake, or perhaps not a mistake at all, but simply the natural expression of someone who had not yet learned to hold vision privately. And the telling of the dream set in motion a sequence of events that looked, from every available angle, like the systematic destruction of everything the dream had promised. His brothers threw him into a pit. Not metaphorically, a physical pit, a place of zero visibility and zero dignity and zero control. And from the pit he was sold, traded for 20 pieces of silver to men who would carry him away from everything and everyone familiar. He arrived in Egypt as a slave, which is the opposite direction from where a dream about rulership is supposed to take you. He worked faithfully in the house of Potiphar, earning trust and responsibility, and just as something was beginning to look like it might resemble the outline of a future, he was falsely accused and imprisoned. He helped a man in prison who promised to remember him, and that man forgot him for 2 full years. 2 years of being forgotten after a decade of being wronged. I am not going to tell you how the story ends yet. I am going to stop right there in the prison, because that is where Joseph was. That is where you may be. In the place where the dream is still alive in you, but the circumstances surrounding you look like its complete opposite. In the place where you have done everything right by any honest accounting, and yet the wrongness of your situation has continued anyway. In the place where the one person who could have spoken on your behalf forgot that you exist. That place is real. Joseph knew it for years. Not days, not weeks, years. And here is what I want you to notice about Joseph in that prison, because it is the detail that changes everything. He did not stop being Joseph. He did not abandon the character that the dream had been developing in him since he was 17. He did not become bitter in the way a person becomes bitter when they have decided that the story is over and the remaining years are simply the aftermath of a promise that was not kept. He remained faithful in a faithless environment. He remained generous in a place designed to produce selfishness. He remained capable of interpreting other people's dreams even while his own felt impossibly distant. He remained, in other words, the version of himself that the assignment would eventually require. And that remaining, that stubborn, costly, unglamorous remaining, was not wasted time. It was the final stage of the preparation. You are not Joseph. Your story is your own and it does not map perfectly onto his. But if you are in the prison right now, if you are in the place where what was promised feels like a cruel joke dressed up as a calling, I want you to know that the prison in Joseph's story was not the end of his story. It was not even the middle. It was the final stage of the preparation for a weight of responsibility that no human being could carry without first having been pressed into precisely that shape. The dream required a Joseph that the pit and the house of Potiphar and the prison were building, and what those years took from him in comfort and freedom and dignity, they returned 100-fold in the form of a character that could stand in front of Pharaoh without collapsing under the weight of the moment. What the waiting has taken from you is real. Grieve it honestly. And then, when you are ready, come with me into what it has been building. Before I give you the new language I promised, I want to acknowledge something that the last section may have stirred in you. Because sitting honestly with loss, really sitting with it without rushing to the resolution, can leave a person feeling momentarily more exposed than when they started. If that is where you are right now, if the naming of what the waiting has taken left something raw and open in you, that rawness is not a problem. That rawness is actually the precise condition that makes what comes next land at the depth it is meant to land at, rather than simply skimming the surface of your understanding. You are open right now. And open is exactly what you need to be to receive a new way of seeing your own story. There is a language that predates the language you have been using to interpret your life. Ancient languages. Languages that were built by people who understood time differently than the modern world understands it, who had categories for human experience that our current vocabulary does not have adequate words to hold. And when you encounter one of these older categories and find that it describes something you have been living through without any words for it, something shifts. Not just intellectually. Something shifts at a level beneath the intellect, at the level where the body holds what the mind has not yet processed, where the spirit stores what the circumstances have not yet confirmed. That shift is what I am after for you in this section. Not information. I want to start with two words from the ancient Greek language, because the Greeks were a culture that thought with unusual precision about time, and they made a distinction that the English language collapses into a single word, a distinction that I believe will permanently change the way you interpret where you are right now. The first word is chronos. You already know this word even if you did not know you knew it. It is the root of words like a chronological and chronicle. Chronos is clock time, sequential time, the time that moves in one direction at a steady, indifferent pace, regardless of what is happening to you or in you. Chronos does not care about your readiness. It does not pause when you are overwhelmed and accelerate when you are thriving. It simply moves, one second after another. one year accumulating onto the previous one. Chronos is the time that tells you how old you are, how long you have been waiting, how far behind you are from where you expected to be. Chronos is the time that produces the particular cruelty of watching other people's milestones arrive while yours remain on the horizon. Most of us, most of the time, are reading our lives entirely through Chronos. And when your life is read entirely through Chronos, a season of waiting always looks like loss. It looks like falling behind. It looks like time being taken from you that you will never get back. The second word is Kairos, and this is the word I want to plant in you today with as much care and precision as I can, because it has the capacity to completely reframe what the last several years of your life have actually been about. Kairos does not mean slow time or spiritual time in any vague, mystical sense. Kairos means the right time, the appointed time, the moment that is fully charged with meaning and readiness and divine alignment, the moment when conditions have converged in a way that makes a particular thing not just possible, but inevitable. The Greeks used this word to describe the exact moment in weaving when the threads are in the right position for the shuttle to pass through. Not too early, when the threads are still being arranged. Not too late, when the pattern has already locked. Precisely the moment when everything is positioned for the action that produces the next part of the design. Here is what changes when you begin to read your life through Kairos rather than Chronos. The years of waiting are no longer years lost to an indifferent clock. They are years in which the threads were being arranged. The relationships that fell away were not simply losses. They were threads being removed from the pattern because they did not belong in the design for what is being woven. The closed doors were not rejections by a God who forgot you. They were the divine hand holding the shuttle back until the moment when passing it through would produce beauty rather than damage. You were not behind in Chronos time. You were being positioned for a Kairos moment. And a Kairos moment, when it arrives, does not feel like catching up. It feels like arriving exactly on time, because in the truest sense, that is precisely what it is. But I want to be careful here, because there is a version of this teaching that becomes a way of avoiding the honest grief I asked you to sit with in the last section. I am not telling you that the waiting was not painful. I am not telling you that the losses were not real. I am telling you that Chronos and Kairos are both real, and that the pain belongs to Chronos while the purpose belongs to Kairos, and that you are allowed to mourn in one dimension while being positioned in another. These are not contradictions. They are the full texture of what it means to live inside a divine story as a human being who can only see one small section of the tapestry at a time. Now I want to give you a second ancient word, and this one comes from the Hebrew language, which is a language that does not separate the physical from the spiritual the way Western thought tends to. Hebrew is a language of embodied experience, and the word I want to give you carries something in it that I think will feel like a hand on your shoulder at exactly the moment you needed one. The word is kava. It is typically translated into English as the word wait, which is an almost criminal reduction of what it actually contains. When someone reads in their scriptures that those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, the word being translated as wait is kava. And what kava actually describes in its original texture is the process of braiding or twisting multiple cords together to form a single strong rope. It is not a passive word. It is not the image of someone sitting in a chair watching the door for something to arrive. It is the image of something being woven together under tension, under the pressure of being twisted and interlaced, with the result being something that is exponentially stronger than any single chord could be on its own. Think about what that means for the years you have been waiting. Every year of faithfulness was not a year of simply passing time. It was a chord. Every year of continuing to show up when showing up felt pointless was a chord. Every night of praying through tears was a chord. Every decision to remain honest and generous and hopeful in a season that gave you every justification to be none of those things was a chord. And Kava says that those chords have not been wasted lying on the ground. They have been in the process of being braided together under the tension of your season into something with a tensile strength that a comfortable, uncontested life could never have produced. You have not been sitting still. You have been being woven. The tension was not punishment. The tension was the mechanism by which the weaving happens. You are not delayed. You are being assembled. I want to add a third concept now, because these three together form a picture of your current season that I believe is more accurate than anything clock time has been able to offer you. The third concept is what ancient and biblical literature calls the wilderness season. You know this concept not just from scripture but from something in your own experience, because I believe many of you have been living in it for longer than you have had language to name it. The wilderness is not primarily a geographical location. It is a spiritual and psychological condition. It is the experience of being led away from the familiar, stripped of the markers and comforts and social structures that used to tell who you were and where you belonged, and placed in a landscape of stark simplicity, where the only consistent presence is the one leading you, and the only reliable provision is the daily bread that arrives precisely when needed and not a moment before. The wilderness does not offer certainty. It offers companionship with the guide. It does not offer visibility beyond the next step. It offers enough light for the step you are currently taking. Every major figure in the architecture of divine history passed through a version of the wilderness before they were released into the fullness of their assignment. Not as a formality, not as a ritual that could have been skipped if they had been more faithful earlier. The wilderness was the assignment before the assignment. It was the place where the interior work happened that the exterior work would later require. It was where the ego was quieted enough for the calling to be heard clearly. It was where self-reliance was reduced enough that the assignment could be carried in dependence rather than in pride, which is the only way any assignment of genuine significance can be sustained over time. The wilderness is not the place where God has forgotten you. The wilderness is the place where God has you entirely to himself. There are no distractions in the wilderness. There are no other voices competing for your attention with the same volume they had in the crowded life you left behind. There is just the presence and the stripping and the slow and sometimes excruciating work of becoming who the assignment requires you to be. And the people who emerge from the wilderness are not the same people who entered it. They are quieter in a way that carries more authority than the loudness they had before. They are gentler in a way that is somehow more powerful than the forcefulness they once relied on. They are less impressed by the things that impressed them before the wilderness, and more sensitive to the things the wilderness taught them to value. The still small voice, the deep provision, the faithfulness of a God who does not abandon the people. He leads into the places that feel like abandonment. The wilderness is not your punishment. It is your preparation, and the fact that you are still standing in it, still upright, still moving, still asking, and seeking and knocking is the evidence that the preparation is working. Most people leave the wilderness before it finishes its work. They find a way out through compromise or distraction, or the simple exhaustion of waiting without a visible end. You have stayed, and the staying is accomplishing something in you that cannot be accomplished any other way. What God has anointed cannot be rushed into service before it is ready, without causing damage both to the one who carries it and to the people. It was meant to serve. The wilderness slows the premature release. It ensures that when you emerge carrying what the people who need you actually need, which is not just the gift but the character strong enough to steward the gift without being destroyed by it. You are not being held back. You are being held together long enough for the gift and the character to arrive at the same moment. And that moment, that Kairos convergence, is closer than anything Chronos has been telling you. Something has been shifting in the atmosphere around your life, and I want to be specific about it in a way that goes beyond the general encouragement that chosen ones are often given and then left to interpret alone. Because general encouragement, while it has its place, does not always give you something you can hold on a Tuesday morning when nothing visible has changed and the weight of the waiting is pressing down on you with particular force. What you need on that Tuesday morning is not more inspiration. What you need is specificity. You need someone to tell you not just that things are going to change, but what is going to change and what it will feel like when it begins, and what you should not do in the moment when you first start to sense the movement. That is what this section is for. There are 3 areas of your life that are in the process of shifting right now. Not eventually. Not someday when you have done enough or believed enough or been faithful enough to finally qualify. Right now. The movement is already underway beneath the surface of what is currently visible, the way geological shifts happen deep underground, long before anything appears on the surface of the earth. The pressure has been building, the realignment has been in process, and what you are about to begin seeing in your external life is the surface expression of something that has been moving in the invisible for longer than you know. The first area is your inner life, the interior landscape of who you are. And I want to start here rather than with the external circumstances because everything else follows from this. What is shifting in your interior life is the relationship between your sense of identity and your circumstances. For a long time, perhaps for most of your life, there has been a version of you that is deeply tangled up with your outcomes. When things were going well, you felt like yourself. When things were not going well, you felt like a diminished or failed version of yourself. Your sense of who you are has been hostage to what is or is not happening around you. And the wilderness season, the pressing, the waiting, the stripping away of the things you used to use to tell yourself who you were, all of that has been doing the slow and painful work of separating your identity from your outcomes, so that the person who emerges from this season is someone who knows who they are when there is nothing external to confirm it. Someone whose sense of self is rooted in something that circumstances cannot reach. What that is going to feel like when it arrives is a quiet and unfamiliar steadiness. Not the dramatic feeling of breakthrough that you may have been expecting. Steadiness. A sense that the ground beneath you is solid in a way it was not before. That you can receive both good news and difficult news, without either one fundamentally destabilizing you the way they once did. You are going to notice that you are less reactive, that the things which used to send you into a spiral of anxiety or self-doubt are meeting a different version of you than they used to meet. Not a version that does not feel, but a version that feels without being capsized by the feeling. That steadiness is one of the first signs that the interior shift has completed enough to begin expressing itself in your outer life. What you should not do in this phase is mistake the steadiness for numbness. The chosen ones who have been through extended seasons of pain sometimes confuse the arrival of peace with emotional shutdown, because they have been in survival mode for so long that calm feels suspicious, as if it must mean they have stopped caring, rather than that they have finally arrived at the solid ground they were always moving toward. Do not pathologize the peace. Do not fill the quiet with new anxiety, because the old anxiety has finally begun to lift. Let the steadiness be what it is. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of a self that is large enough to hold the feeling without being consumed by it. What you can trust in this phase is that the interior shift is real even when it is quiet, even when there is no external evidence to confirm it, even when the people around you have not yet noticed any difference. The interior work is always the first to move and the last to be seen from the outside, which means you will be living inside a change that others cannot yet see. And that gap between your interior reality and your external circumstances will require you to hold the knowing without external confirmation for a season. You can do that. You have been doing it for years in a different form. Holding what you sense in your spirit in the absence of external confirmation is one of the skills the wilderness built in you. Now that skill is being applied to something that is moving toward you rather than away from you, and that changes everything about how it feels to hold it. The second area that is shifting is your relationships. And I want to be specific about what this looks like, because the relational shift that accompanies a chosen one moving into their season of fulfillment is frequently misread as loss. And I want you to have eyes to see it for what it actually is before it happens, so that you are not blindsided by the form it takes. Some people in your current circle are going to begin moving out of your life, not necessarily through conflict or betrayal or any dramatic ending, simply through a natural drift that neither of you will engineer and neither of you will be able to stop. The drift will happen because the frequency of who you are becoming is shifting, and the connections that were built around who you used to be will not automatically recalibrate to match who you are. Benman. This is not abandonment. This is alignment. The relationships that were built for your survival season were exactly right for that season. But the relationships built for your assignment season carry a different frequency, a frequency of vision and purpose and mutual iron sharpening. And they cannot occupy the same space as the relationships built for comfort and familiarity until the comfort and familiarity relationships have created the space they need. What this will feel like in the moment is sometimes lonelier than the loneliness you are already familiar with, because this loneliness comes with the additional awareness that you can see it happening, and you do not quite know how to stop it. Let me say this clearly. You are not supposed to stop it. The drift is not a failure of your character or your faithfulness or your ability to maintain relationships. It is the natural and necessary relational adjustment that precedes the arrival of the people who are built for where you are going. And those people are coming. They are being drawn toward the same Kairos moment you are moving toward, from different directions and different backgrounds and different sets of experiences, but toward the same convergence point. When they arrive, you will recognize each other not by familiarity, but by resonance. By the sense that this person understands something in you that you have not had to explain, that they can hold the weight of your vision without flinching. That being in their presence does not require you to make yourself smaller. What you should not do in this relational phase is force the old connections to bear a weight they were not designed to carry. Do not try to take the people who belong to your survival season into your assignment season by sheer force of will or loyalty. Honor what those relationships were. Be grateful for what they provided and release them, gently and without bitterness, into the season they belong to. The releasing is an act of love, not betrayal. Both of you will be freer for it. What you can trust in this relational phase is that the right people are being aligned to you right now. They may not be visible yet. The introductions may not have happened yet, but the same God who orchestrated every meaningful relationship in your life up to this point is not suddenly out of ideas. The connections that belong to your next season are already in motion, already being drawn toward the convergence, and when they arrive, they will feel less like a social event and more like a homecoming. The third area that is shifting is what I will call your access to resources, to opportunities, to the provision that your assignment requires. And this is the area where the chosen ones most frequently misread what is happening. Because the shift in access does not always look like what they imagined abundance would look like. It does not always arrive as a large, dramatic windfall that announces itself with unmistakable clarity. More often, it arrives as a series of small, precise, almost eerily timed provisions that appear at exactly the moment they are needed in exactly the amount that is required, and not a great deal more than that. This kind of provision requires a different relationship with trust than the relationship most people have been taught to have with money and resources. It requires the willingness to take the next step before the full provision for the whole journey is visible. It requires the ability to read the arrival of exactly what you need as evidence of faithfulness, rather than reading the absence of excess as evidence of scarcity. The chosen ones who move cleanly into their assignment season are typically the ones who have learned, through the discipline of the wilderness, to recognize daily bread as abundance rather than as barely enough. That recognition is not a small thing. It is the foundation of the kind of stewardship that can be trusted with more. What you should not do in this phase is interpret the precision of the provision as limitation. Do not look at the exactly enough and conclude that exactly enough is all that is coming. Exactly enough right now is the expression of a provision that is perfectly calibrated to the step you are currently taking. As the steps grow, as the assignment expands, as the capacity that the wilderness built in you is put to use at the scale it was built for, the provision will grow with it. You are not being given a small life. You are being given a life that grows in proportion to the version of you that has been built to carry it. Type the words "I receive" in the comments right now if something in these three areas is resonating with something you have been sensing but did not have words for until this moment. And if this message has been a companion to you in a season when companions have been hard to find, please share it with someone who is walking their own wilderness road, because the chosen ones were never meant to make this journey without the knowledge that others are walking it too. The three areas I just described to you: the interior steadiness, the relational realignment, the precise and faithful provision. These are not separate events that will arrive one after another in a neat, predictable sequence. They are facets of a single movement, a comprehensive shift in the shape of your life that is already underway. And as that movement continues, as the Kairos moment you have been positioned for begins to express itself in the visible dimensions of your experience, there is something I want to name for you about who you are becoming in this process. Because the person who emerges from a wilderness season of this depth and duration is not simply a better version of the person who entered it. They are a different category of person altogether, and that new category deserves a name. I want to give you that name today. Not as a title you wear on the outside, not as an identity you perform for the people around you, but as a deep interior recognition of what the years of pressing and waiting and remaining have actually been building you into. The name I want to give you is this: you are a cycle breaker. Let me tell you what that means, because it is not a small thing, and it deserves more than a passing mention. A cycle breaker is someone who absorbs into their own body and their own history the accumulated patterns of pain, limitation, fear, and broken inheritance that have run through a family line, a community, a generation, and who, through the specific combination of chosen faithfulness and divine assignment, stops those patterns from continuing forward into the future. A cycle breaker does not just change their own life. They change the trajectory of every life that comes after them. The children who will grow up in the environment that the cycle breaker creates will carry a different inheritance than the one the cycle breaker received. The community that is touched by the work of the cycle breaker will have access to patterns of thinking and relating and believing that were not available before the cycle breaker did the work of breaking the old ones. This applies to you. The reason the wilderness was as long and as thorough as it was is not simply because you needed a great deal of personal development, though that is also true. It is because what you are breaking is not small. The cycles that were running before you showed up in your family, in your community, in the specific corner of the world you were placed in, those cycles have momentum. They have been running for generations in some cases, and breaking them requires a specific kind of person. Someone who has been pressed deep enough and held long enough and refined thoroughly enough to carry the authority that cycle breaking demands. Surface-level transformation does not break generational cycles. Deep, costly, wilderness-forged transformation does. And that is exactly what has been happening in you. Think about the people who will come after you. Your children, if you have them or will have them. The younger people in your community who are watching how you navigate this season, even if you do not know they are watching. The people whose lives will intersect with yours in the assignment season. People you have not met yet. People who are currently in the early stages of their own wilderness and who will one day need someone to tell them that it is survivable, that the pressing produces something real, that the God who leads into the wilderness does not abandon the people he leads there. You will be that person for them, but only because you stayed, only because you did not walk out of the wilderness before the work was complete. Only because you are still here, right now, in this moment, listening to a text that found you because something in you was still open. The cycle breaker does not always see the full scope of what they are breaking while they are in the process of breaking it. That is one of the harder realities of this particular calling. You do not get to watch the dominoes fall in real time. You do not get to see the full cascade of consequence that your faithfulness sets in motion. You plant, and other hands often do the harvesting. You break the ground, and the seeds that grow from it may be tended by people who come after you. This requires a particular kind of faith that is less about personal outcome and more about trust in the larger design, the willingness to do the right work without the guarantee of watching it reach its fullest fruit in your own lifetime. That willingness is not natural. It is forged, and it is forged in exactly the kind of season you have been in. Now I want to do something with you that requires your imagination, your willingness to step inside a picture I am going to paint and let yourself stand inside it rather than observe it from a distance. This is an exercise in seeing, and I want you to take it seriously, because what you can see clearly in your imagination, your spirit can begin to move toward in reality. Picture yourself standing at a threshold, not a doorway in any ordinary building, not a frame with walls on either side and a floor beneath your feet, but a threshold, in the truest sense of the word, the precise line between one season of your life and the next. The line between what has been and what is being released into. You are standing on that line right now, not approaching it, not 100 steps away from it. You are standing on it with everything that has happened behind you and everything that is coming open in front of you. Now turn and look behind you for a moment. Look at the terrain you crossed to get here. I want you to see it honestly, not with the filter of regret and not with the filter of false positivity, but simply as it was. The long stretches of quiet when nothing seemed to be moving. The moments of doubt so heavy you could feel them in your body. The nights of prayer that ended without the clear answer you were asking for. The relationships that did not survive the distance. The plans that collapsed. The version of yourself that you had to leave behind at various points along the way. Because it was not the version that the assignment required. Look at all of it. Do not look away. And as you look at it, notice this. You crossed it, every single mile of it. You crossed it and you are still standing. That crossing was not wasted. That crossing was the making of you. Now turn forward. Look at what is open in front of you. It is not fully visible, and it is not supposed to be, because the life that is coming for you is too large to be held in a single glance. But what you can see, if you let yourself look, is the light. Not the blinding, dramatic light of a Hollywood moment, but the steady, growing, unmistakable light of a new morning arriving. It is the light of a season that has not yet fully dawned, but is already changing the color of the horizon. It is the light of things that have been promised beginning to take on material form. It is the light that the cycle breaker sees when the breaking is complete, and the new pattern is ready to be established. You are standing on that threshold right now, not in the imagination exercise anymore. In your actual life, the threshold is real, and the person standing on it is not the person who entered the wilderness. It is the person the wilderness built. It is the cycle breaker who absorbed what needed to be absorbed, who stayed when leaving would have been easier, who kept their hands open to receive what was coming, even when nothing visible was arriving. That person is you, and that person is ready in a way that the person who started this journey was not and could not have been. I want to speak a specific blessing over you now, in the spirit of what the ancient leaders did when they recognized a transition moment in the life of someone they were walking alongside. A blessing is not a wishful statement. It is a spoken declaration over a reality that already exists in the spirit before it fully materializes in the natural. And this blessing is not mine to withhold. And I want to stay with you here at this threshold for just a moment longer, because there is something else that needs to be said before we move forward. Something that the blessing I just spoke over you is asking to be accompanied by. The cycle breaker does not walk through the threshold alone. This is one of the most important things I want you to carry with you from this section. The very nature of what a cycle breaker does, the breaking of patterns that have run for years and sometimes for generations, is not a solo act. It was never designed to be. The wilderness may have felt like a solitary journey, and in many of its most essential dimensions it was, because certain interior work can only be done in the privacy of a person and their God. But the emerging from the wilderness, the crossing of the threshold, the living out of the cycle breaker identity in the real and daily texture of an actual life, that is done in community. That is done in the company of the people who have been aligned to your assignment, the ones I described earlier, who are coming toward the same convergence from different directions. So as you stand at this threshold, I want you to resist the old reflex, the one the wilderness trained into you out of necessity, the reflex of going it alone, of holding the vision privately, of protecting yourself from the disappointment of sharing something large with someone who cannot hold it. That reflex served you in the season that required it. But the cycle breaker who steps through the threshold carrying that reflex into the new season will find that the reflex, which was once a form of protection, has become a form of limitation. The new season requires you to let people in. Not everyone, not indiscriminately, but the right people, the aligned ones, the ones who resonate at the frequency of where you are going, rather than the frequency of where you have been. I also want to name something specific about the emotional experience of standing at a threshold that most people do not expect and therefore are not prepared for. Standing at a threshold does not feel the way you think it will feel. You may have imagined that arriving at the edge of your breakthrough would feel triumphant, clear, full of the certainty and the confidence that the long journey finally behind you would naturally produce. And sometimes it does feel that way, but more often, the threshold feels surprisingly quiet, surprisingly ordinary, surprisingly like just another Tuesday. The most significant transitions in a human life frequently arrive in the form of a moment that looks from the outside like nothing remarkable is happening at all. A quiet decision, a small step, a conversation that seems minor but redirects everything that follows. A morning where you simply choose to believe, one more time, that the God who brought you to the threshold has every intention of walking you through it. Do not wait for the threshold to announce itself with trumpets. It may have already announced itself in a whisper, and the whisper may have been this message, and the step through may have already begun the moment you decided to keep listening. You are the cycle breaker. You are at the threshold, and you are not alone. May the steadiness that has been built in you in the quiet become the foundation from which everything you have been called to build now rises. May the relationships that are aligned to your assignment find their way to you with the same faithfulness that has been finding its way to this moment. May the provision that accompanies your purpose arrive in forms you recognize and forms you have not yet imagined, in timing that leaves no room to doubt its origin. May the cycles that have run through your history stop at your hands and not find their way into the hands of those who come after you. May the name Cycle Breaker not be a label you carry privately, but a reality that becomes undeniable to everyone whose life intersects with yours. May the wilderness you survived become the language you use to reach the people who are still in theirs. And may the Kairos moment that you have been positioned for arrive with the fullness that the Chronos years of preparation have been building toward. You are not at the beginning of something. You are not at the end of something. You are standing at the threshold. And the threshold is exactly where the cycle breaker stands before everything they were built for begins. There is a question that lives underneath every other question a chosen one carries through their wilderness season. And it is not a question about theology or purpose, or even about whether God is faithful. It is a more immediate and more practical question than any of those. It is the question of what to do with your hands right now. What to do with this Tuesday. What to do with the next hour of a life that has been in preparation for so long that the shift from preparation into action feels simultaneously overdue and terrifying. Because for all the interior development that the wilderness produces, for all the identity clarity and the character deepening and the frequency shifting that the pressing accomplishes, there comes a moment when the chosen one has to take a step, a real step, in the real world, with real hands and real resources and real relationships that may or may not respond the way they are supposed to respond. And that moment, the moment or movement, is often the hardest moment of the entire journey. So this section is for your hands, for your next hour, for the specific and practical steps that belong to the cycle breaker who has stood at the threshold long enough and is now ready, in whatever imperfect and incomplete and still becoming way is available to them right now, to step through. The first area of practical movement is your relationships. And I want to start here because the relational dimension of the Chosen One's assignment season is the one that most directly affects everything else. The cycle breaker who is stepping into their season of fulfillment needs to make two kinds of relational moves simultaneously. And understanding both of them clearly is what allows you to navigate the transition without unnecessary pain on either side. The first relational move is the intentional honoring and releasing of the relationships that belong to your survival season. These are the people who were with you in the wilderness, who knew you when the wilderness was at its most disorienting, who held what they could hold of your weight in the seasons when the weight was heaviest. They deserve to be honored, not with a formal ceremony or a difficult conversation necessarily, but with a genuine internal acknowledgement of what their presence meant in the season it was given in. Gratitude is a powerful force in the spirit, and the Chosen One who releases the survival season relationships with genuine gratitude, rather than with guilt or grief, or the complicated mixture of both, creates a kind of clean closure that allows both parties to step fully into what belongs to their next season. The practical expression of this honoring is simple. Reach out to one person from your survival season this week, not to have a significant conversation about the nature of your evolving relationship, simply to say, with whatever words are authentic to you, that their presence in a difficult chapter of your life meant something real. That is all. The honoring does not require a lengthy explanation. It requires sincerity, and sincerity in this case is usually very short. The second relational move is what I call intentional positioning. This is the practice of placing yourself, physically and virtually and energetically, in the environments where the people aligned to your assignment season are most likely to already be. The people who resonate at the frequency of your calling are not randomly distributed across every possible environment. They tend to gather in specific kinds of places, around specific kinds of conversations, in communities that are organized around purpose and growth, and the kind of honest faith that does not flinch from difficult questions. You know some of these environments already. You may have been avoiding them because entering a new relational environment when your confidence has been reduced by a long wilderness season requires a kind of courage that the wilderness can temporarily diminish. But the courage to enter the room is not the same as the confidence that comes after you have been in the room long enough to find your footing. You do not need the confidence before you enter. You just need the courage to walk through the door. The confidence follows the action rather than preceding it. This week, identify one environment, one community, one gathering, one space, either physical or online, that is organized around the kind of purpose and vision and faith that aligns with where you are going, and show up to it once, without the pressure of it needing to produce an immediate meaningful connection. Simply show up, be present, and trust that the people who are aligned to your assignment will recognize something in you that introductions and small talk and the ordinary social mechanics of meeting people cannot fully account for. The Chosen Ones recognize each other. It is not always immediate, but it is always real. The second area of practical movement is your purpose, and specifically the question that the Chosen One in their wilderness season has often stopped asking out loud, because the asking itself became a source of pain. the question of what exactly they are supposed to be doing, the question of the specific shape that their assignment takes in the practical, daily, Tuesday morning dimensions of an actual life. This question does not always resolve itself in a single dramatic moment of revelation. More often, it resolves itself through a series of small, clear, quiet promptings that each reveal one step without revealing the whole staircase. So here is what I want you to do with this question this week. I want you to stop trying to answer it at the level of the whole picture and start trying to answer it at the level of the next single step. The full vision of what you are called to may not be visible yet, and that is not a failure of your faith or your clarity. It is the nature of Kairos revelation, which tends to unfold in proportion to your readiness to receive each stage of it. The next step, however, is almost always visible, if you are willing to look at it without the pressure of it needing to be the whole answer. Ask yourself this specific question, and ask it in writing if you can, because the act of writing forces a specificity that thinking alone often avoids. What is the one thing I already know I am supposed to do that I have been delaying because I am waiting for more certainty before I begin? Write the answer down. Do not judge it. Do not immediately begin the internal negotiation about whether you are ready or whether the timing is right or whether you have the resources the step seems to require. Just write the answer, and then within the next 48 hours, do one small version of that thing. Not the full version, not the finished version. One small, imperfect, incomplete version of the first step of the thing you already know you are supposed to be doing. The clarity that you have been waiting to receive before you act is often only available on the other side of the action you have been waiting for clarity to authorize. The step produces the clarity more reliably than the clarity produces the step. The third area of practical movement is what I am going to call your stewardship. And I want to be honest with you about this area because it is the one the chosen ones most often treat as the least spiritual of the three, when in reality it is deeply and essentially spiritual. Your stewardship is the way you manage the resources, the time, the energy, the money, the attention that are currently in your hands. Not the resources you are waiting to receive, the ones you already have. Because the principle that governs the expansion of resource in the chosen one's life is not the principle of receiving more before you can do more. It is the principle of demonstrating faithful stewardship of what is currently in your hands as the condition that authorizes the release of what is waiting to be placed there. This does not mean that you need to have your finances perfectly in order before God can move in your financial life. It does not mean that you need to have your time perfectly managed, before you can be trusted with a larger assignment. What it means is that somewhere in the resources you currently have access to, there is a dimension of stewardship that you have been neglecting, not out of laziness or bad faith, but out of the subtle despair of the wilderness that whispers what is the point of managing carefully what you currently have when what you currently have is so much less than what you were promised. That whisper is a lie, dressed in the language of reasonable discouragement, and the cycle breaker who catches that whisper and names it for what it is and then returns to faithful stewardship of what is currently in their hands is the cycle breaker who creates the conditions for the next level of provision to arrive. This week, identify one area of your current stewardship that has been operating below the standard you know it should be operating at. One area, not every area, because attempting to overhaul everything at once is a strategy that typically produces change in nothing. One area. It might be the way you manage your mornings, The first hour of the day that currently disappears into the passive consumption of other people's content before you have given your best attention to your own purpose. It might be a financial habit that has been operating on autopilot in a direction that does not align with where you are going. It might be the way you steward your physical body, the sleep, the movement, the nourishment that your body needs to carry the weight of the assignment at the level the assignment requires. Choose one area. Make one specific, small, sustainable change in that area this week. Not a dramatic overhaul. A single, specific, repeatable adjustment that you can actually maintain. And maintain it. The power is not in the size of the adjustment. The power is in the consistency of the maintaining. These three areas of practical movement, the relational honoring and intentional positioning, the single next step in your purpose, and the specific stewardship adjustment, are not a comprehensive life plan. They are not meant to be. They are the cycle breaker's equivalent of the first step through the threshold. They are the translation of everything this message has been building toward into something you can do with your actual hands in your actual life, in the actual days, immediately, following this moment. Because a message that leaves you feeling inspired without leaving you with something to do has not fully completed its work. And this message intends to complete its work in you. Type the words "I am ready" in the comments below if you are stepping through the threshold today. Not someday. Not when everything is in order and the conditions are perfect and the certainty is complete. Today. With the imperfect readiness that is the only readiness that has ever actually been available to anyone who stepped into something significant. The chosen ones who changed things were never fully ready. They were simply willing to move with what they had in the direction they were called to go. That willingness is enough. It has always been enough, and it is enough right now. There is a particular kind of gratitude that belongs to the end of a long journey, and it is different from the gratitude that belongs to ordinary moments of blessing. Ordinary gratitude says thank you for what I received. The gratitude that belongs to the end of a wilderness season says thank you for what I survived. Thank you for what was taken away when the taking away was the only thing that could have built what needed to be built. Thank you for the closed doors and the unanswered prayers, and the long silence that felt like absence and turned out to be the most intimate form of presence available to a person being prepared for something their current self was not yet able to carry. That is the gratitude I want to speak into this final section. And I want to speak it with you, not at you, because you have earned the right to stand inside this particular kind of thankfulness, and I do not want you to rush past it on the way to what comes next. So before anything else, let me say this to you directly and without decoration. Thank you for showing up. Not for showing up to this message, though that matters too, but for showing up to your life in the seasons when showing up asked everything of you and gave very little back in the visible dimensions of your experience. Thank you for the mornings when you got out of bed, even though staying in bed would have been the more honest expression of how you felt. Thank you for the prayers you said when you did not feel like praying, when the words felt like they were falling into a silence that was not listening, when the faith required to keep speaking into the invisible was a daily act of will rather than a natural overflow of confidence. Thank you for not becoming what the wilderness could have made you, for not becoming bitter when bitterness was the most available emotion, for not becoming closed when closing would have been the most rational form of self-protection, for staying soft in the places the pressure was trying to harden, for staying open in the places the disappointment was trying to seal shut. That staying That specific and costly and largely invisible staying is the most significant thing you have done in this season, and it deserves to be named before this message ends. I want to tell you something that I need you to hear, not just in your mind, but in the place where you actually live, the place beneath the thinking, where the things that are really true about you are stored. You are not alone in what you have been carrying. All across this world, right now, in different time zones, and different languages, and different cultural contexts, and different specific expressions of the same essential experience, other chosen ones are walking into this exact same message. They are sitting in cars and living rooms and bedrooms and office spaces, and wherever else a person finds a private moment in a busy life. They are carrying the same specific weight you have been carrying, the loneliness of a calling that cannot be fully explained, the exhaustion of a faithfulness that has not yet been publicly vindicated, the ache of a promise that has been held so long it has become part of the interior architecture of who they are, something they could not put down, now even if they wanted to, because it has grown into them and they have grown around it. Those people exist, they are real, and in this moment, they are listening to the same words you are listening to, and something in them is responding the same way. Something in you has been responding throughout this message. You are in a room that is far more crowded than the silence of your own experience has led you to believe. The chosen ones are never as alone as the wilderness makes them feel. I want to give you one final practice before this message completes its work. Not a 7-step program, not a comprehensive strategy. A single, quiet, physical act that I want you to do either right now or in the next few minutes when you have a private moment. I want you to put something down. Think about the specific weight that you have been carrying through this wilderness season. Not in the abstract. Specifically, the particular fear that has been running beneath everything else, the one that you do not always name out loud, but that is present in the background of most of your significant decisions and most of your 3 a.m. thoughts, the particular grief that has been sitting in your chest, the loss that did not get a proper funeral because life required you to keep moving before the mourning was complete. The particular version of shame or regret or self-doubt that has followed you through this season like a shadow you cannot shake because it knows exactly which memories to surface and exactly which wounds are still tender enough to press. I want you to picture yourself holding that weight in your hands. Actually feel the weight of it. Let it be as heavy as it actually is, rather than the manageable version of it you carry in public. And then I want you to picture yourself standing at the threshold we talked about in the last section, standing on the line between what has been and what is coming. And I want you to set that weight down, not throw it, not bury it, not pretend it does not exist. Simply set it down at the threshold. Let it stay on the side of what has been. Because what is coming does not require you to carry it. What is coming was designed for the version of you that has been built by the weight, not the version that is still crushed beneath it. The weight did its work. It built what it was meant to build. And now you are allowed, you are actually invited, to step forward without it. This is not a magical act. The feelings will not disappear the moment you perform it. The memories the weight was made of will not be erased. But something will shift in your relationship to the weight when you choose, deliberately and consciously and with full awareness of what you are doing, to leave it at the threshold rather than carry it through. The shift may be subtle at first, a slight lessening of the pressure behind your sternum, a breath that comes a little more easily than it has been coming. A sense, quiet and not fully formed, that the next step is possible in a way it did not feel possible before. Start there. Start with the slight shift. The full release follows the willingness to begin releasing, not the other way around. Now I want to speak to something I have been building toward through every section of this message, something that needs to be said clearly before we close. The Genius Wave, the tool I introduced to you in the earlier part of this conversation, the 7-minute audio program developed by Dr. James Rivers through more than 30 years of neuroscience research, is not a spiritual shortcut. It is not a replacement for the faith and the faithfulness and the interior work that the wilderness requires. What it is a precise and scientifically grounded tool that supports the interior work by creating the neurological conditions in which that work can happen most effectively. If somewhere in the middle of this message something in you recognized that the 7 minutes of silence I described, the specific brainwave frequencies that the chosen ones are primed to access, and the daily practice of receptivity that the assignment season requires are all pointing toward the same thing, then that recognition was not accidental. The Genius Wave is designed for exactly the kind of person who has been listening to this message. Not because the message was designed to sell a product, but because the product was designed for a human need that this message has been describing from the beginning. If it is a yes for you, if something in you knows that those 7 minutes with the frequency behind them are the next practical step toward the interior clarity, your assignment requires it is waiting for you in the pinned comment below this video, not as a pressure, as an invitation. And the 90-day guarantee means the only thing you risk by accepting the invitation is 7 minutes of your morning. I want to ask you to do one more thing before you step away from this message and back into the ordinary and extraordinary texture of your actual life. Like this message if it met you somewhere real today, not as a transaction, as a signal to the people who need to find it, that it is worth finding. Share it with one person, not the person you think needs to hear it, but the person who comes to mind when I say, there is someone in your life who is in their wilderness and does not know it has a name. Subscribe if you are not already subscribed, because there are more messages coming, and the ones who are in this season need to be present when they arrive. And if this channel has been a companion to you in a season when companions have been hard to find, consider supporting it through the donate option, not for me, but so that the reach of this message can extend to the chosen one who is waking up on a Monday morning somewhere in the world without anyone to name what they are carrying, without any language for the ache that has been sitting in their chest for longer than they know how to explain. Your support means that person gets found, and getting found, being seen and named and told that the wilderness has a purpose and the waiting has an end, is sometimes the only thing that makes the next step possible. All across the world right now, chosen ones are stepping into the message that was designed to find them. You were one of them today. And the fact that you stayed, that you listened all the way to the end of something this long and this demanding, tells me something about you that I want to say out loud before we close. You are not a person who gives up on things that matter. You are not a person who walks away from a room where something true is being spoken just because the truth is taking longer to arrive than you expected. You are a person who stays, and staying, in the vocabulary of the divine, is one of the most eloquent forms of faith that exists. The threshold is real. The cycle breaker is ready. And what is waiting on the other side of the step you are about to take has been waiting for exactly the version of you that this season built.